Welcome to the IMM Friday Flash Talk, anchored by Govin Whittles.
The reason why that responsibility was taken away from the Hawks is not yet known.
With marketing enthusiast Tarasai Moffat.
To have a return on sales, you need to have posts that are going to be engaging.
The IMM Institute's Friday Flash Talk. Welcome, everybody, to another installment of the IMM Institute's Flash Talk Friday. This is the platform where we discuss the latest marketing trends, bring you insightful views from people who are at the cutting edge of developing the marketing industry. My name is Govin Whittles. I'll be your host, and we're really looking forward to today's discussion. As always, I have Tarasai Moffat, the CEO, founder of MD of Gateway Synergy. She's our resident marketing guru who helps us shepherd the conversation along. And today it's an absolute pleasure to introduce Andrea Kraushaar. She's the Research and Insights Director at Youth Dynamix. And we'll be talking about aligning your marketing strategy for the youth prosumer, right? First, we'll talk about what that means, and then I'm sure I'll have a couple of interesting questions to pose, as will Tarasai. Andrea, it's an absolute pleasure having you on the IMM Friday Flash Talk. Please tell us a little bit about how one would align their marketing strategy for the youth prosumer and what the youth prosumer is.
Awesome, no problem. So I think let's start off with who the youth prosumer is. So the youth prosumer is a very new and very different consumer. From all the research that we've done with both millennials and with Gen Zs, these consumers are really viewing life, viewing the world, viewing things completely differently, and they expect brands, products, and services to recognize them as an important target audience, and they as consumers, firstly, on the one hand, they're obviously consumers of brands, but they're also responsible and recognize their responsibility as promoters as well as critics of brands.
Yeah, I think that they're the fiercest critics of brands. Does that change how you would align your marketing strategy for them? Do you
I would say absolutely.
Tiptoes?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really critical that brands, products, and services, recognize firstly the importance of this target audience, but also realign their marketing strategies to appeal to this target audience, to be relevant to them, to include them. And I don't know if you'd like me to touch on a couple of pointers now, or if you want to go through some other pointers, but I've got a couple of key insights in terms of what marketers should do or should know in terms of connecting with this target audience correctly. So I think the first thing that is really critical is to be aware of the importance of the transparency of information that you share and provide to the youth prosumer. A lot of companies or corporations have previously, I think, been sort of very vague in terms of what has or hasn't been shared with consumers in general. And from a youth prosumer perspective, the expectation is that companies and brands share the good, the bad, and the ugly with young people, so that they have everything at their disposal in terms of making a decision. And then they will decide, sort of what is or isn't relevant for them. I think another thing that marketers need to take into account is the importance of marketing and communicating with the youth prosumer authentically, as well as sharing about the values of the brand or the product or the service. And this obviously, again, needs to be done in an authentic, a trustworthy, and an honest manner. Our research shows that 90% of youth prosumers support brands whose values resonate with theirs. So this really just shows how really very important it is for brands to authentically share about their values, share a bit about who you are, why you're around, what is your mission statement, why you're around, who do you want to connect with, What do you stand for? How do you make a difference? Where are you based? And this is what youth prosumers are looking for. And I think it very much ties to my earlier point in terms of the transparency of information that is shared. Then also what is really critical for marketers is to always and constantly provide added value to youth prosumers. Youth prosumers are the type of consumer who recognizes that, brands, products, and services are obviously putting their wares out there, obviously needing to make a profit. But they also know that, just putting something out there from a functional perspective is not good enough. So it's very much about connecting with the youth prosumer from an emotional perspective, and then also finding out where those added value elements lie. Is it an opportunity to, provide some level of support? How much better could you understand the youth prosumer, and how could you meet them better in terms of them trying to meet their life goals, in terms of what they're trying to do? How could you be more informative or inspirational? And how do you navigate the life journey that they're trying to pursue? And then I think what is very important for brands to remember is that, yes, obviously this consumer or youth prosumer is a very digital, intuitive consumer. They've grown up with technology. They don't use it like a tool like we do. For them, it's very intuitive. It's very, natural and easy to use. And they default very easily between the on and offline worlds. But they do have a very strong expectation for human engagement, which I believe a lot of brands are actually missing in the equation. Things like customer service, an opportunity to connect with a consultant or somebody, either in person or obviously via phone call or something like that, is very, very important to this youth prosumer, which I think a lot of, sort of companies actually don't recognize, because everyone just wants to put everything digitally and online and put out chatbots and apps. And yes, whilst that is important, as I say, that human connection and engagement for, specific questions that youth prosumers may have, or, where they're looking for specific advice, that is very important. And then a last point I'd like to make is very much the importance of, the importance that youth prosumers place on reviews and customer reviews. I don't know whether brands always recognize how important this prosumer recognizes how important reviews are. They really expect an opportunity to provide a review at every consumer touch point within the journey, or along the journey, and they're very likely to provide either positive or negative reviews depending on obviously their experience with a particular brand or product. And they're not shy obviously to voice their opinion, which is obviously one of the really key characteristic traits that we see with regards to the youth prosumer. Just one last thing that I'd like to mention with regards to the youth prosumer that kind of encapsulates all of the things I've spoken about now is really their need for self-reliance. They've grown up in an environment and in a world that is, sort of very complex and very changing. Things are very uncertain, and a lot of brands, corporations, companies, people in power have very much let this generation down. So this generation is very much one that relies on themselves. Our stats show that 91% of them are searching for information themselves, and their most important point of contact is really to go and look online via social media, through reviews, speak to other people who've maybe engaged with a particular product or service, and that is where they're gathering the information. And I think, if you recognize that about the youth prosumer, these 5 points that I've shared with you in terms of marketing would make much more sense, because, then it means that your website really needs to have all the information that they're requiring. Because if they're looking for something, they really want to go there and they want to self-soothe and self-help and figure out what it is that you offer, why you're in business, how you can help them. And if all of that information is not available for them, I promise you now, they're not going to look any further. They'll just pick something else.
Youth prosumers sound high maintenance. How old is the concept of a youth prosumer?
I'd say it's pretty new. So we actually started referring to them as youth prosumers. I think the traditional definition of a prosumer was very much you know, a consumer who's also part of the production process. But we believe it's so much further than that, you know, and looking at Gen Zs especially, but also millennials to some degree, you know, you know, the fact that they recognize their responsibility of not just consuming brands. You know, older generations, it was all about the brand, you know, gives you a product or a service and you can consume that, you know, whereas this generation recognizes it's more of a quid pro quo relationship, you know, so you give them a product or service and then they give you their attention, their time, their energy, their money, whatever it is, and they recognize that exchange, which I'm not sure, you know, always used to come through in with older generations.
You mean they appreciate what you've done for them, which is the older generation be like, I paid for it, so I deserve this kind of service.
I find the youth prosumers is worse than the older consumer. I think the older consumer, you know,
Worse?
Yeah, worse, much worse. We didn't have as much choice as young people had. Or sort of say, you know, in the old days, you know, there weren't that many brands, there weren't that many offerings. You know, there wasn't maybe so much competition between different industries and different companies. So I think the older consumer is probably a lot more lenient than the youth prosumer. I think the youth prosumer, you know, they pretty much give you one chance. And if you haven't met, you know, whatever their expectation is from their side, they're quite happy to cancel you and move on. It's really that simple.
Ruthless. I see you nodding, Karasai, like you know
No,
that's on there.
it's extremely true.
Yeah, I mean, what would you describe them as, Karasai? A high maintenance or ruthless or interrogative?
So I wouldn't want to describe them because that kind of puts a label on people, but I would use a case study as an example of a company or a brand that has managed to tap into that market and has done it so seamlessly that it almost seems like it's part of the core or the identity of the people themselves. And that would be Discovery. If you look at Discovery, you go onto their website, their app is efficient, their app is crystal clear. You don't necessarily need to always be contacting their contact center, but if you do, it's right there on your phone. At the same time, you go to Virgin Active, you get there, there's a membership fee, there's a vitality lifestyle that goes on. People can get their Huawei's afterwards, their milkshakes, they can take pictures, they're in the gym vicinity. That's already tapping into that market through fitness and health. If you decide, no, you're not really a gym person, you've got the park runs, you can collect your points through the park runs. That is a whole community of probably tens of thousands of people that gather every single Saturday and walk and run together, which brings in that community feel of you being a part of something bigger than yourself. And then you even look at it from the rewards point of view, because there always needs to be some rewards and benefits when dealing with this audience. You go on there, there's 20% discounts on their flights, there's benefits from a medical aid, from a banking, from an insurance. So they've really managed to encapsulate what this message is about in the sense of bringing together technology, bringing together that consumerism, bringing together the rewards, bringing together the values and the principles that people believe in, such as healthy living, healthy fitness. And this has all been encapsulated in a brand currently to date. So it is possible. I wouldn't say that you've got high maintenance people charging along and marching against that company at this stage. No, it's the type of value that they're bringing that has made a difference. So as marketers or brands, you just need to ask yourself, are you really as appealing and attractive and providing the rewards and the benefits that would make them more likely to be a part of your brand?
Very interesting. I'd never thought of the Vitality program in that way, but I suppose you're right that it caters to a specific prosumer market. But then let's just be clear about the ages to which this category would apply, if there are any. Andrea, how old is the prosumer?
So in terms of millennials and Gen Zs, which we would, you know, sort of put under the hat of a youth prosumer, I would, you know, sort of include people between the ages of 15 and 34, which pretty much encapsulate your Gen Z and millennial markets. Gen Zs obviously being sort of 15 to 24, and then obviously 25 to 34 would be your millennials. And in the research that we've done, and also if you read up on it globally, Gen Zs, I'd say, are possibly even kind of a step ahead of millennials. Millennials very much, I guess, started off or stepped off, away from what Gen X was doing, and probably started defining what a youth prosumer is. And Gen Zs have pretty much taken this to a whole nother level, where they really, I guess, expect, brands to have that two-way relationship with themselves and the brand. They know that the brand obviously wants to get their time, money, or attention, or their energy, and they're expecting something for that. Not just obviously a functional delivery of something, but they want something else for that. And yeah.
So it's interesting that they split across teens towards 35, right? So I know that you would define or calculate their buying power differently depending on their age, because sometimes the buying power may sit with the parent. So what kind of buying power do you think the prosumer has?
So firstly, before getting to the buying power, I think it's quite important to recognize the size as well of this market, especially in this country. And then obviously if we look at the broader African continent, we as a continent have a very young population, or young bottom heavy population. So 34% of SA's population is between the ages of 15 and 34. So that's, sort of encapsulates a third of the population. Obviously, if you go under 15, which is where quite a lot of, sort of up and coming young people are still lying as well, it kind of goes even bigger. So under 34 overall, it's about 64% of the population. And then in terms of buying power, some research that we conducted about 2 years ago shows that Gen Zs and millennials collectively spend and influence about 303 billion in SA. So it's definitely not a figure that can be sneezed at. And it's, I think what often gets a lot of young people, sort of quite frustrated, I guess, with brands, is that a lot of brands believe that they don't have money, and that they don't have influence, and that they don't have, some level of spend. And this is completely untrue. From obviously buying something themselves, obviously potentially future buying something, but also in terms of influence within the family market. Parents are a lot more democratic these days. They ask their kids for their opinions on all types of product categories. And then also young people, our researchers showed that they're influencing the family. Sometimes they are financially contributing to the family. We obviously live in a very, sort of diverse, sort of environment in SA, from an income perspective, and a lot of young people do have a big responsibility to help contribute to the family, and they're a lot more aware than previous generations of money, of how much things cost. They're a lot more savvy, they're a lot more conscious in terms of where their money's going, just because things have obviously been so hard, and they've obviously been part of the narrative of COVID and the downfall of the economy, not just in SA, but globally. So they're very aware of that. And I think a lot of brands don't necessarily always recognize that either.
303 billion is a significant annual spend. Terasai, you made a great example about discovery, but I wonder whether most brands are actively looking into catering for the youth prosumer and being cognizant of the buying power that the market has. What's the chat like among marketers? Are they talking about this sector?
I think there are a number of organizations and companies that have really embraced this, and they are making significant changes, especially in South Africa and Africa. With the rise of TikTok, I think it's made it even easier to be able to identify what people are talking about, what people are chatting about, what kind of videos and likes and dislikes that their consumer has. So with the rise of TikTok, it's opened up that knowledge of their consumer a little bit better than they used to have before. And if you can see some of the cultural nuances that we have, we are very quick to react as a country, because we have that cultural advantage. We are exciting people is the term that I would like to call it. We're exciting people. So we are able as brands, even now, a lot of the brands are adapting to that. You've got your Vodacom summer challenges where it's youths coming together to have this big summer bash. You have your you can name quite a number. You have your Nando's doing those tasting sessions where the youth come in and they influence how the product design and the product development is done, because they taste the different flavors and decide that this is the best Muzanzi flavor for them. And it's giving them the voice, it's giving them the platform to connect, to talk, and to be able to influence even the product design of a brand. So we can see that, as marketers, especially in Africa, I think in Africa, this is where we are really winning in terms of being able and agile enough to be able to adapt our marketing strategies quickly to the needs of the consumer.
I think South Africa is well known for having young people pick flavors for them, for their next chip or for their next cool drink. And what I've noticed more recently is that alcohol brands are actually trying to bring in the younger consumer by having, for example, with whiskey tasting, they'll have a professional come in to explain the differences in European countries. And recently I've seen it being done here. And a lot of the young guys are saying, well, this is introducing us to a different type of lifestyle. And it's kind of a passing of the baton. I wonder if that's driven by the emergence of the youth prosumer. Are we seeing, Andrea, a definite change in the behavior of marketers?
I would say yes and no. I think there are absolutely marketers who recognize the size and influence and importance of young people. I do believe that, sometimes it's not always as easy to change the narrative, maybe within a corporation or an organization. And also, I think sometimes it happens too slowly. If I think about how quickly, the youth prosumer moves, how quickly they change, how they embrace change, which is very different, I guess, to how older generations worked. And I think sometimes how corporations are set up, sometimes things are possibly not as quick as they should be. But I do believe that, marketers are, re-looking at how things should be done. I think the challenge with the youth prosumer is that things are always changing. So it's a case of, always keeping up to date with, what's happening, what are their expectations. And I think what Teresa mentioned earlier on, is encouraging and allowing them to be part of the process is really important. I mean, this generation loves giving their opinions. They love being part of the process, so I think that is a really great way for marketers to remain relevant, by keeping their finger on the pulse all the time and including this generation in whether it's product development, or research, or including them in marketing concept testing or anything along those lines.
I think there are some that are extremely difficult to be able to apply that, in the sense that, it's easier for other brands than you can't apply some of this in medical, for example. They still need to follow, medical research. They still need to follow the time period to test, et cetera, et cetera. So you can't just say, oh, because the youth or the young people are wanting this, then boom, this is the new medical product, the new slimming drug that you can create. There's still, tests and research that needs to go to it. Even with utilities, I mean, how can you have influential youth within the utilities industry or within the legal sector? So there are certain fields where it might not seem like it's taking off, but it's also because of the regulations within that industry.
Can I just add to that, Teresa? You make a very important point, but I think it's kind of important to look at both sides of the coin. One of the industries that you haven't mentioned, which I agree with, has also very similar, sort of kind of parameters, is the financial industry. But from a young person perspective, kind of looking at it from what they're looking at is a lot of the time, certain things have been set up There's a lot of systems and processes and red tape, etc., which is obviously important, but also a lot of young people view things so differently. And because they look at things so differently, they're often questioning why and how things are being done and whether this is relevant. And I think that's often very difficult for a lot of industries because, you know, sometimes it's easier to kind of say, look, you know, we've always done it like this, so this is how we should do it. And I think that's often where there's a bit of abrasion between, you know, sort of the young prosumer and a lot of brands, because, you know, the young prosumer is kind of going, you know, if we can do it in a 2-step process instead of a 6-step process, why do we need to keep doing it in the 6-step process? So I think there's a lot of learnings that we can take from this generation. And yeah, I mean, it's difficult, I agree.
On a previous episode, we discussed experimental budgets for campaigns. And you mentioned the influence that the prosumer has in the family, and it's considered the prosumer's consideration of values. So I know that the older generation is a bankable market, a loyal market that marketers have kind of established relationships with. Do you risk alienating or say the teenager going up to the parents and say, right, in this house, we're no longer buying this coffee because I've decided that their values don't align with us, when you try to put out a campaign which is aimed at the young person?
So you're asking whether who the marketer should, you know, kind of take into account in terms of their marketing?
Yeah, well, I mean, whether the marketers could end up jeopardizing their stable older generation market through a new experimental campaign for the prosumer just because of the family influence.
They could absolutely. I don't think it's that much of a silver bullet approach, though. I don't think anything, you know, needs to be looked at just with one particular lens. I think there's a lot of opportunities to keep doing what you're doing well with the older consumer and obviously ensuring that they continue to stay loyal. But I do feel that a lot of the older consumers are potentially starting to question the same types of things that a younger prosumer may be questioning. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to look outside of maybe what is already being done with the older loyal consumer. And I think it's very much about building that dialogue and that narrative. You know, young people not just have influence within a family, but there's a lot of communication, you know, between parents and teenagers, young adults. Our research shows that the relationship that young people have with their parents is exceptionally good. You know, 91% of them want to actually spend quality time with family. And they also view family members, especially mom, as their most important role models and most important people in their lives. And I think that is definitely something that marketers need to take into account, because there is a relationship within the family. You know, possibly previous generations didn't have as good a relationship between parents and young people, but these young people definitely have good relationships with their parents.
And that extends to essentially onboarding the brands that the family will use, yeah?
I would say absolutely. You know, I mean, obviously there's certain factors that need to be taken into account around, obviously every family is different. You know, certain families might, you know, sort of have a different way of doing things. But I do believe, based on the research that we've done, that, and also globally, you can see families are so much more democratic. They absolutely encourage young people to give their opinions, especially in certain categories where young people naturally are more knowledgeable. You know, when it comes to technology, you know, or telecommunications, a lot of the digital space, you know, looking at even, you know, cars, automotive brands, they're very aware of, you know, what's happening, keeping up with the technology. You know, so I'd say across industries, actually, I do think that there is communication that happens between parents and young people. And I do think sometimes, you know, the young people, they don't just influence it, but I think they often give older generations and parents different viewpoints and different ways of looking at things. You know, and they almost, as I say, they kind of shake up that, you know, sort of status quo in terms of how things were always done. And I think that's obviously, something that marketers need to embrace, because the environment is always changing, and I guess the consumer's changing and becoming more demanding as a whole.
So if a market is trying to reach the young consumer right now, it seems obvious that they would use a digital campaign. But what is the research showing about which mediums the youth prosumer consumes campaigns through?
So yes, I think a lot of the time a digital campaign seems obvious, but I wouldn't say that it's a silver bullet. I think a lot of the time it's important to recognize who is your target market exactly. Just kind of dumping everyone into youth prosumers or maybe saying Gen Zs and millennials, that obviously is a generational definition. There's certain things that need to be taken into account from a segmentation perspective around the category, the product consumption, psychographics, where they're obviously staying, etc. But yes, I mean, digital obviously is very relevant. In terms of the channels, the obvious channels, I know Teresa mentioned it earlier on, TikTok obviously is very, very popular, as well as Instagram, Facebook, not so much anymore. And then I think what is quite critical, what a youth prosumer really expects, is that marketers are very strategic and intuitive in terms of what type of content they put out on which type of platform. I think previously it was a little bit easier, to maybe cut and paste certain messages across different digital platforms. That's no longer relevant with the youth prosumer. And I think sometimes, having fun and looking at it in terms of how do we inspire this consumer, using maybe TikTok videos to inspire, rather than inform, and maybe using another digital platform to inform or educate. There's different ways that they could be looked at. And then, yeah, I mean, there's obviously...
You mean like when you inspire, you're not really selling anything. You're just communicating values.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's where the added value comes in. I think it's, young people, again, they know they don't expect it only to be about sales. I mean, they know you're trying to sell something, but it's not just about sales. So how do you add value? Sometimes a brand can inspire, from food brands to sports brands. I think throughout the years that I have done research with young people, I mean, I mentioned sports brands. Nike's always been a brand, that's kind of come up repeatedly across the years in terms of the type of work they're doing, from the innovative products to the inspiring campaigns to, staying woke and relevant in terms of current happenings, and really keeping their finger on the pulse, across all different types of, never mind touch points, but also, elements and how they put it all together. Yeah.
But the youth market does seem very divided. So when catering to one section of the market, it's almost predictable that another section will end up attacking your campaign. Especially with the more empowering progressive issues, which brands tend to stay away from recently because of the experience of others. So when you're approaching this market, there's always a sort of hesitancy among marketers and a consideration of that possibility. Does your research show that that's informing a delayed approach to the market, or is it just that you're going to pick your hill to die on as a brand and you're going to go for it?
You know what? I think some brands have been very bold, and I think from a youth prosumer perspective, the expectation would be, to think back again to the values of the brand. Is this particular campaign or stance that you're taking resonating authentically and honestly and sort of transparently with this target audience based on the values that you as a company or a brand put out there? Are you just doing it because you want to get into the news or because you want to get likes, or something like that? I think that's probably that more relevant. The youth prosumer, they can see something a mile off if it's not real, if it's not authentic, if you're just doing it for the sake of doing it. And I would definitely use that as a bit of a, sort of yardstick in terms of deciding whether it's a good or a bad idea. Obviously having the narrative or having those conversations is really important. And I think a lot of brands are doing that very successfully. But yes, I mean, I think it does need to resonate, with a particular brand's values.
Identity is constantly evolving, though, and I've noticed that a number of brands try to evolve with the times so if something major happens, they would want to have a say, not because they want to be popular, but because they want to mark themselves down on what they perceive as the right side of history at that moment. And in that moment, they're putting the brand on the line, right? When you're approaching that as a marketer, and you're looking at the temptation of putting your market down, right? Is that a difficult decision to make with this prosumer? I mean, is there any research which shows how that could your brand tank because of that?
Absolutely. I think it's a very difficult decision. And I think you said it earlier, the prosumer, the youth prosumer can be very unforgiving too. They can be quite quick to cancel something. Cancel a brand or a viewpoint or something like that. So I think it is quite a very difficult decision to make.
Is cancel culture still a thing?
Definitely.
It feels like a number of brands have come back from it.
Definitely, I think it is still a thing. Young people do like, providing their voices. But yes, I think the narrative and having that narrative with young people is important too.
Kraushaar, we've been discussing the risk of taking on or commenting on a controversial development in society as a brand because you want to essentially evolve your identity to have your values placed on record. And in the context of how much of a risk it is to do these quick turnaround campaigns that we've been discussing on the Friday Flash Talk, which responds to the immediate development in society with a market like this. So, I mean, are you seeing boldness from marketers when it comes to the controversial issues or, light stepping hesitancy?
So I think what's really missing is strategic partnerships from a data sharing point of view. And I'm going to explain that in the sense, like, let's give, for example, Checkers 360 app. Everybody loves that app. You are free to order your food, your meals anytime, They contain a lot of data at the moment that they've gathered about different consumers. They know that Govan loves his watermelon water. And if his grocery list, he doesn't have his watermelon water, he's going to be extremely upset that day because he didn't get his watermelon water. Now, imagine if you were the marketing manager of that company and you knew that you had a loyal customer who's called Govan, who always orders your watermelon water. And on this day, for some strange reason, there was a shortage in that particular Checkers store, and they didn't have the capacity to send this package to you so that you could have your water. Imagine if there was a sharing platform so that the data could be shared amongst these different organizations, and the marketing person, they would, even if their own capacity, would personally deliver this water to you, because that's how important consumers have become to the marketing person. But because there's no data sharing amongst organizations, everyone is trying to tap into the same people who already have banks. You're selling us more and more insurance when I already have insurance, but there's a whole market of other people that need insurance that you haven't even tapped into, but you're still trying to oversell to the same people. But if there was data sharing among strategic partnerships within organizations and companies, they'll be able to identify, these are the consumers that we've targeted. These are the more consumers that we can access if we come in with a strategy like X, Y, and Z. And that would help to grow the economy much further, because then the needs of the consumers would be met. And I think one thing as well that Andre pointed out was the fact that the consumers have a voice. The most important thing to them is customer service. They can live with, okay, there's load shedding. They can live with, oh, there's a riot here, there's a crisis here, there's this here. But the minute Takealot does not deliver their order within 60 minutes that they're waiting for that food to be delivered, it's like, how dare you? And they're picking up the phone and they're angry and they're what? customer service is very important. So we can try to talk about, yes, how quickly did you respond to the tweet? How quickly did you respond to the comment? But the bottom line is, if you give them efficient, good customer service in store, they walk into your store, they're able to buy their product at the price you advertised it, not they get into store, you advertised it for 100 Rand, they walk into the store, it's 200 Rand. No, you advertised it for 100 Rand, your customer service must follow that same process. Then you'll have a happy, loyal customer. So I think we need to not be so aggressive on the social medias and make sure that from a customer service point of view, we are delivering in-store, online, and on all different touch points that the customer journey goes through.
So do you have to...
Sorry, can I add something to that, Teresa, because I'm completely on the same page. So our research shows, in terms of youth prosumers, 97% of them say customer service is important. So I think I completely share your sentiments. I mean, that I don't believe a lot of brands and companies recognize that young people think that customer service is that important. And 78% say they'll pay a premium price for good customer service. So I agree with you completely. Customer service is king. And I think it's almost like a double whammy in the sense that sometimes brands promise certain things and then can't deliver that. And then that's also where things fall down. And then, as you say, like, then obviously the customer is going to go onto social media and exactly the example you gave, then they'll get angry and do X, Y, Z based on the promise that was made that wasn't actually delivered. So yes, customer service, really, really critical to this generation. And I think a lot more, sort of money, effort, time, and energy needs to go into customer service and developing customer service, not just in terms of marketing or the social media aspect.
But brands do fail when it comes to customer service and things go wrong. How do you manage complaints when it comes to the prosumer? What are they showing? Do they understand?
Yeah, so I think, again, from a youth prosumer perspective, 3 words that I keep mentioning, which are really important to youth prosumers, are authenticity, honesty, and transparency. Young people obviously know that things go wrong. I don't think they have an unrealistic expectation, unless that was maybe put out for a particular reason. And also sometimes they may be viewed as being more unrealistic compared to other sort of generations, but that's just because of the environment that they've grown up in. They've grown up in a technological world. They expect things to be available 24/7. They can Google anything at their fingertips. So that level of expectation has absolutely been raised in young people. And you can't sometimes blame them for having that expectation, because that's the environment that they're growing up in. I think the key thing is really to figure out, how do you then meet them at that level? And if there is a complaint, then be honest and say, look, I'm sorry, we didn't do it correctly. Let's fix it by doing A, B, and C. They would absolutely welcome that. And it shows the humanness and the realness, the authenticity behind the brand, that you can make mistakes. And I think that's something that young people would expect. They don't expect you to be perfect all the time.
And I think most organizations now need to have a customer relations community manager. Sorry, they're actually called social media community managers. These are people that are there and responsible for responding to all your social media in terms of your tweets, your comments, your retweets, because it's important. In the age that we live in, if someone comments, they see it as almost like writing you an email. And that's how we need to take it. We're used to the professional way of, you get an email, you go through the survey, you go to the website, this is your refund policy, this is how, everything in the website. No, now by commenting or tweeting, people are expecting a response. And if you don't respond, it's as good as someone blue ticking you on WhatsApp. I mean, how rude is that? So that's the same with brands. That's the level of relationship. If you're going to ghost someone or blue tick them, what reaction do you expect them to have?
I think that's such an important point, because people don't really understand the seriousness of social media comments and what it means to the person who's made a public comment. And it's so humiliating to have complained online and then there's no response from the brand.
There
This
is
question
also
is for,
my education that needs to go into it. Not everything needs to be tweeted, not everything needs to be commented. There are certain channels that you can follow. You know, you can pick up the phone and make a phone call. You can send an email. You know, you can be polite. You can request to see the manager at a restaurant before you tweet that their food is unacceptable. So there is a certain level of consumer education that does need to go into the younger generation to say, let's have some level of decorum, you know, and a respect of relationships that later you might bump into that restaurant manager at the playgrounds, or at you know, your cousins could date or something. You know, there's always relationships that can be formed. Or one day you might walk into their office and need a job, and they're going to be looking at your social media and how you were respectful within that regards, and how it ties into your behavior as a person. So I think in as much as there is a lot of receiving, I think brands also need to start taking action in terms of consumer education and raising awareness about the acceptable ways of raising complaints, even online.
okay, we're almost wrapping up. I'd just like to know, Andrea, this is for Andrea and Teresa, which portion of the marketing budget is currently going towards targeting the youth prosumer, according to your research, Andrea? Do you know?
I wouldn't have a percentage because I don't have that level of figure, but I would say that it varies per brand and per industry. And I think also, you know, sometimes, you know, different industries maybe don't recognize the importance of the youth prosumer as much as others. You know, so for example, I know the investment and insurance industry or the finance industry, they absolutely put monies behind the youth prosumer, but possibly not as much as a youth specific product. I don't know, maybe it is the same. You know, I think it's very company and category specific.
From the outlook of things, there's huge budgets that are being allocated to user-generated content, because the youth prosumers are very heavy on reviews. So the more invest in user-generated content, then if it's authentic, obviously, then you can say, okay, this is how the brand is having more presence. So there's quite huge budgets that are going into that. From a user-generated product. And then there's also consumer engagement that's going in, from saying, please can all the people design the new sneaker before it launches? And that goes into a lot of budget for people, allowing them to make sketches, allowing them to design the shoe, allowing the testing and trial phase. So different companies and organizations are taking it more seriously. And even within some sectors where they might not be heavily investing in it, because maybe it's business to business versus business to consumer, they are investing in the research behind it to feed into their product design at a later stage. So, for example, the plastic industry will research the fact that prosumers prefer very what is the right word to use? Biodegradable products. They want to show the recyclable elements, things like that. That means a lot to that prosumer. So for that reason, they start designing their products that are more eco-friendly. And this messaging needs to go out at some point.
Goes back to the values aligning to modern day issues. In previous episodes, we also talked about how marketing is changing, where you're only developing 3/4 of the campaign and you're allowing the consumer to finish the campaign off. And it strikes me that the people who are changing marketing are the youth prosumers, that they're forcing marketers into a different way of communicating with them. But we have run out of time. So before we go, Teresa, I'd like to start with you. What do you think is the most important thing for marketers to remember when considering approaching this market, or the attitude towards the potential of this market?
It would be get prosumers in as much as possible at the earlier stages if you can. If you can, within even your product design, behind even your naming conventions, not just a normal, like everyday survey that we used to do, or those research methods where we'd only bring them in and invite them into a closed off room and ask for their opinion. No, I'm talking about extending it to different markets, different age groups, different backgrounds, different LSMs, and getting the different viewpoints. Even if your product is a mass good, what would the people want to see or feel behind your brand, and putting that in as early as possible before pushing products out. That would, number one, help from a product design and innovation point of view. And then obviously from an end customer point of view, ensuring that the customer service is excellent. Walk through the journey yourself. If you were a consumer and you walked through your shop or walked through your aisles, literally putting yourself in that position, what would you feel, or what would you want people to feel? And then letting that communicate into all elements of your customer journey, online, digitally, in store, in presence, events, etc., and letting that be the heartbeat of your organization.
Andrea, what would you say are the most important things from the Youth Dynamix research about the youth prosumer that marketers should keep in mind?
So the first one, I would like to just corroborate with Teresa on the first point that she made, really getting down to the youth prosumer, having deep conversations with Gen Zs and millennials, understanding their need states, understanding their motivators, what makes them tick, where they're trying to get to in life, what is important to them. And then, using those deep consumer insights to actually weave those into what you're putting out there, whether it's product development, marketing, any level of advertising, etc., but allow them to be involved in the process. I'd also like to encourage brands and marketers to, sort of think more about the review process. Encourage youth prosumers to be part of reviews, give reviews, whether positive or negative, and then use those again as learnings and key touch points, because throughout the consumer journey, they will obviously give reviews, and they also place a lot of emphasis on those reviews and the importance of those reviews. And then I think the third thing I'd like to leave with the audience is really to think about how things could potentially be done differently. Some of the research that we've done with young people shows the low trust factors that come through with things like advertising, social media influencers, and celebrities. So rethink, I'm not saying they're not relevant at all, but rethink how things could be done for this target audience, incorporating reviews, using the human connection, the customer service element, the self-soothing, self-relevance element of this target audience, and just re-looking at how marketing and advertising is done.
Definitely agree with you. Thank you so much.
That's very interesting.
At 100%. And we mustn't lose the older generation by assuming that the young people don't want to learn. They actually do want to learn. If you can come to young people with actual insights, facts, statistics to justify why this is the process, you might end up finding a huger following, because then they are behind you and fighting for you on social media and saying, this is the brand of choice because their values are X, Y, and Z, and we understand the process, which is why we are in support of this brand.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, the one thing that's obvious is that you can't afford to ignore them. I think it's 303 billion annually now, but that's certainly going to be exponentially increasing. Thank you very much for your time, ladies. Teresa Moffat, MD of Gateway Synergy, our resident marketing guru. Thank you for your great insights. And Andrea Kraushaar from Youth Dynamix, thank you for your presentation. It's been insightful, and I'm sure this is a conversation that will keep developing, that people will take further, particularly on social media. So do take part in the conversation. Share this on TikTok with the youth prosumers, on Instagram Reels. I think the older guys are on Facebook, people like me. But go ahead on Twitter, on Snapchat even. And then I know marketers love talking on LinkedIn. So please do comment on this discussion. We'd love to hear your views, share it far and wide. And thank you once again from myself, Govin Whittles. This has been the IMM Institute's Friday Flash Talk. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll see you next time.